Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour podcast. And we're talking today again about those mischievous killer whales, mischievous orcas off of the Iberian coast and what they're up to with boats. So, of course, I'm joined by Dr. Scarlet Smash, whose birthday is today, and Dr.
Hooray!
Naomi Rose from the Animal Welfare Institute is going to give us an update. So, first of all, Smash, how are you and what are you drinking?
Oh, I'm drinking Pinot Noir from France. Louis Jadot. Jadot.
Louis
That's
Jadot?
there. That
That
sounds
means
much
I
better.
love Louis.
Oh, does it?
Louis of love.
That's great. Okay, well, that's what I'm drinking. It's perfect for my birthday. But Dr. Kraken, we were actually talking about this topic on a radio segment that just came out last weekend where the orcas were chasing boats, correct?
Indeed, indeed. So we are going to be talking about what's happening off of the Iberian coast and Gibraltar with orcas chasing boats and what the latest news is. And we have with us Dr. Naomi Rose.
The expert of orcas.
He's going to tell us about what the latest happenings are.
Well, hello, and thanks for having me on again. The latest happenings are, unfortunately, these guys are not learning anything from their antics, and they keep doing it.
No way.
Oh, yeah. So the season has just started. The first interactions are usually seen in March and April, so I haven't heard that there are any new interactions so far this year. Again, this would be about when they start doing it. But in 2025, they were very busy, and they had moved back to where they were originally seen doing it. Most people think of them as the Gibraltar orcas, that they interact, we don't like to say attack,
Yes.
that they interact with yachts and other boats in the Strait of Gibraltar. And they do, and they still are. They are seen there frequently enough. But there have been some efforts to get vessel traffic there to behave differently, to move inshore near the strait when they see orcas, and that seems to have been relatively effective. You know, they don't like to get too close to shore there, and so if the vessels move inshore, they tend to break off any encounter they've started. That didn't make them stop entirely. So they were seen very frequently interacting with vessels in the north, where in fact that's where they started, off of Galicia, the northern coast of Spain. So unfortunately, although they moved, they didn't stop. So that's what happened last year. Now they may be doing something different entirely this year, but I doubt it.
So you were talking about how there are some ideas to try and dissuade them from going after these rudders. You know, for them, it sounds like rudders are like a cat toy, you know, must play with cat toy. So there was an idea about having a bead curtain around the rudders to try and distract
Yeah.
them.
That's known as, believe it or not, I mean, when I say the word, you'll recognize it. It's a hukilau. I think most people, when they think of that word, it's a Polynesian word, they think of it as some sort of party or something. At least that's what I
Yeah.
used to think a hukilau
Right,
was.
yeah.
It's not. It's a fishing net. And the party was because you had a good day or season of fishing. The hukilau is actually the net. As Kraken put it, it's like a bead curtain. It's not a net per se. You know, you don't have to sit there and, you know, actually make a net. You just put sort of like a bead curtain into the water. It's weighted at the bottom. And as far as the fish are concerned, and apparently also orcas and dolphins, it's impenetrable. It's a wall. It's a net. But in fact, it's not. Like I said, it's just you know, you could swim under it if you tried, but they don't necessarily know that. You know, a cetacean will echolocate off of it or see it, and they think of it as a net, and so they stop moving forward. And it's been used to herd orcas off of dangerous areas where they might strand. And it's also been used to herd them in a direction you want them to go when they are stuck in shallow water or stuck in a cul-de-sac, or, you know, they've lost their way. They've navigated themselves into a corner, as it were. And hukilaus have been effective at getting them to move forward. They move away from it. They don't like it. And so the thought was if you dropped it around your rudder, if you stop moving, obviously you don't want to move forward when you're doing this, and you just dropped it over the side, it would be easy to make, inexpensive, and easy to carry. Wouldn't necessarily take up a lot of space, and it might work to keep them away from the rudder. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, we did have an update from the folks who live there, the researchers who work in that area, off the coast of Iberia. Very few opportunities, both in terms of interactions and money and so forth, were possible last season. They didn't get a lot of testing done of various methods to deter the animals, including the hukilau. Getting the mariners to change their behavior was more successful in Gibraltar. And unfortunately, that method of moving inshore, moving closer to shore where the whales don't like to go, isn't necessarily effective along the coast of Portugal or northern Spain. It stays fairly deep all the way to shore, whereas apparently gets shallower fairly quickly in the strait. And so it's effective. The whales don't like to go into that shallow water, but not so much along the coast of Portugal or further north. And so there really isn't much we can ask the mariners to do. They do ask them to slow down or stop and to cut their engine and things like that. And that doesn't necessarily stop the interaction.
So what are the governments of Portugal and Spain and Gibraltar? I guess Gibraltar with the UK government. So what are they doing about the whole issue at the moment?
Well, they're trying to, get funding together, trying to get, these testing efforts done, not just the hukilau, but other methods of deterring them. There was the thought that there was this one kind of acoustic deterrent that was effective in the fishing industry in Scandinavia off of Norway. And they were hoping to try to use that to see if that acoustic deterrent would be effective and so on. So they're working on getting those projects off the ground. They are trying to alert mariners about the orcas. There's a bit of debate about whether they should do that because some of the mariners might try something negative. They might take those warnings and go there on purpose to do something to the orcas. We've been trying to persuade people that, this isn't malicious. It's not an attack, but they don't really care when their rudder's being attacked or being rammed and broken and their boats are being disabled. There was another sinking, at least one, and I think there was actually two other sinkings last year. As I pointed out to anybody who will listen, it's not purpose of the behavior. If it was, a lot more vessels would be sunk because they're really usually pretty good at what they do. And if sinking was the goal, then they would be sinking a lot of boats. And they have, in fact, over the last 6 or 7 years, only sunk, quote unquote, only, the vessels that sank weren't so much like that. Only, my boat's the one that sank. They've only sunk about 8, I think, or 9 maybe now. And the thing is that the reason they sink those vessels is because when they're trying to break the rudder, they inadvertently also breach the hull. It's not the goal of the behavior. Typically, breaking the rudder is sort of the end game. It's appears to be the goal of what I think of as a game. Yeah, so if they don't break it in a certain period of time, they tend to swim away. It's a failed game. If they do break it, they play with the piece for a while. That they get quite excited and then they swim away. And so that seems to be the goal. Whereas sinking is just an extremely unfortunate, inadvertent outcome of some of these games where they accidentally or just incidentally, breach the hull. But again, for those folks who incidentally have the hull breached, it's not so minor a thing. They don't really care why the whales have done it. All they know is they've just lost a very expensive boat. So, unfortunately, there's a lot of debate about whether it's a good idea to tell mariners where the whales are. You can avoid that area if you know where they are and avoid an encounter. But also, if you're angry enough, you might go there on purpose and do something to the whales.
So have we spotted calves in these pods that are playing with these rudders? I mean, has this become a learned behavior?
The main perpetrators have been juveniles, but they're growing up. Been quite a few years now. This behavior started in 2020. It's now 2026. So that's 7 seasons total. So the original perpetrators, who were young animals, are now much older teenagers. And some adults do participate in these encounters. They tend to be the mothers of the juveniles or the adolescents. So they're not necessarily initiating it themselves. They're just watching over their kids, and sometimes they join in the game, as mothers sometimes do. And so it's not young calves, very young calves who are doing this. It's juveniles and adolescents who are now growing up into adults. Perhaps, as far as I'm aware, the oldest juvenile or adolescent who was ever participating in this is now a young adult, and they're still doing it. So it is becoming part of the culture, if you will, of Iberian orcas, which is extremely concerning. We really hoped it was a fad, that they were going to stop doing it eventually, that it would become boring or the game would just lose its allure, but it doesn't seem to be happening.
It's a little like kids playing soccer in the streets, and occasionally they kick a ball through somebody's window.
Well, no, I don't think that's a good analogy, because hitting a window with the ball would have to be the goal. They are trying to break the rudder. What would have to be the occasional thing is that they break the window that they hit. And that's not what they're trying to do, which would be the sinking of the vessel. So they are trying to break those rudders, which is, again, not very funny for the people who are experiencing this behavior, because they could sink. So that's no fun. And also it's just scary. These wild animals who are big and predators, they got big teeth and all of that. And they're smashing and smashing and smashing your boat. And you're sitting there with your white knuckled, hoping they'll go away. And so, they start doing things. The mariners have been throwing firecrackers. That's like their favorite thing to do, is to throw firecrackers over the side. And that's not good for the orcas. They are acoustic animals, and it can be deafening. And that's sort of why they do it, but it doesn't work. So this is the thing I've been trying to impress upon the mariners, who are justifiably angry and frightened, and I'm not denying that. But all of these nasty things they've been doing, they've poured gasoline on them, they've thrown rocks at them, they've thrown chains at them, and they dropped these firecrackers. They shot them with flares. They do these things, and it's now 2026, and they're still ramming rudders, so it doesn't work. These are the same animals. They're the same individuals. There's only about 40 Iberian orcas. There's actually fewer than that. They are a critically endangered population. They are, not constantly replacing themselves, and it's always new orcas. It's the same orcas, the same individuals who keep doing this. So they're the same ones you threw the firecrackers at last time, and the same ones you poured gasoline over the last time. And it didn't deter them. It didn't make them stop. They're still doing it. And again, I'm not sure yet that they've even started this season, although if I looked it up, I'd probably find out there's been an interaction or two, because they usually start in March, and they're still doing it. So it doesn't work to take your anger out on them. It's ineffective. So I really wish people would stop doing it and, contact these researchers, or I hope the governments are able to move forward with these research projects to try these other methods we've come up with, these other ideas that we've come up with as a group of experts, to see if they work, because they're not going to necessarily harm the animals. A hukilau is just a bunch of string in the water with a weight at the bottom, and hopefully these methods will work. And I'm hoping that if they work, and again, they kind of gave up in the Strait of Gibraltar because the mariners were asked to move inshore, and the whales don't like to go there, and they kind of moved north. That seems to have been effective. So if you see what I mean, that the game, unfortunately, itself has not gotten boring, but the area where they were really concentrating their activities has gotten boring, because the boats keep moving inshore, which they don't like to follow there. So I'm hoping that if we come up with a method that works, that's not harmful, they will get bored, and the game will lose its fascination, and they will give it up. Because if it is, in fact, this novel behavior that started in 2020, and we make it boring, they might just give it up. But so far, this reaction that a lot of mariners have of throwing things at them and throwing firecrackers over the side and shooting flares at them, well, not just pointless, it may actually be making it worse.
Yeah.
Because it's a reaction. I mean, think about, teenagers who like to do dangerous things. They don't show the best judgment, do teenagers. And these guys are really smart, and they're very much like us in terms of how they mature. And so I really think people should think of them as sort of risk-taking teenagers, as they think of human teenagers. And developmentally, they're very much like that. And so what you're making them think is, this is really risky. Great, let's try it again. It's, they're taking this, they're doing this high risk behavior, and you're making it riskier, and that actually seems to be egging them on. And so
making it more exciting.
Making it more exciting. And so I'm really hoping that, as time goes on, these people sort of start looking at it as cost of doing business to sail through this area. This is a risk you're taking, that you might get your rudder rammed by orcas, and start not reacting. Start accepting it as cost of doing business to move through this area, and maybe make it boring. No reaction.
And we still don't even know why they started this behavior, right?
Well, why they started it, I would argue, is no longer relevant, because it's 6-7 years on and they're still doing it. It very well could have been a negative interaction. Some vessel struck one of the whales and injured it. There was a whale with a cut on its head that that was seen in 2020, and that may have been the trigger. I would argue that's irrelevant now, because it's become this coordinated, persistent game that they're getting some sort of gratification from. And I would argue that every reaction that mariners have, when they react in a very flamboyant way, throwing things, dropping firecrackers, it actually
excites
makes
them.
it more likely they'll do it again, not less likely.
And I saw a cartoon just the other day, again, that was talking about killer whales versus billionaires, but it's not J.K. Rowling's or Jeff Bezos's or Leonardo DiCaprio's super yachts that they're attacking. It's just sailing boats.
It's just your average sailing yacht. I mean, these are not for the poor. I mean, these folks have money, and so but it's not billionaires. These are folks that are just sort of routinely moving through this area. And in fact, some of the folks who are sailing these sailing yachts, are just delivering them. They're just crews who are working. These are working people who are just trying to get from point A to point B to deliver the finished product, which is the boat. Several of the vessels that have been damaged or have been involved in these interactions have been built in the UK and are being delivered to somebody inside the Mediterranean Sea. And so they are sailed. It's the most efficient way to get them from the UK to the Mediterranean, is to put a crew on board and sail it down there, as opposed to getting it delivered on an even bigger vessel. And so, these are not necessarily the owners of the vessels that are dealing with this phenomenon. It's working crews who are just delivering the product. On the other hand, a lot of the folks who are involved are in fact, just out there sailing, and it's something they do. It's a nice place to sail, and it's a common throughway. And several of the people who've been dealing with this are routine visitors. They come back year after year and sail their boats up and down the Iberian coast, and they've been involved in these interactions. And again, I would hope that these folks are really starting to realize this has become a characteristic of the area. You might have an interaction with a bunch of orcas. And again, the vast majority of the interactions result in no damage or minor damage. Vast majority. We're talking about 20-25% of the interactions involve damage. And then if you take all of the interactions, which are well over 1,000 by now, only, again, quote unquote, only 8 or 9 have sunk. So, your risk of actually sinking is very low. Your risk of damage is actually not great. It's double digits, so that's always significant. But again, you might get away with no damage at all. Sometimes they just aren't really into it, and they ram you a few times without any serious damage and swim off. So far, it's just been an inconvenience for the humans involved. Nobody's been injured, nobody's been killed. When you try to hurt these animals for what they're doing, you're directing that anger toward a critically endangered population. So is it worth their death that they're playing this dangerous game? I would hope we would come to the conclusion that no, it's not. Again, let's just make this the cost of doing business, of sailing around here, around this area. And again, if you don't react at all, if you can sort of gird your loins and be tough and just wait it out with absolute silence and no reaction at all, they might lose interest. It's something they've been advised to do by the authorities, play dead, but very few of them are doing that for obvious reasons. It's extremely hard to play dead.
Yeah,
no, it's extremely hard to play dead when they're attacking.
ramming.
Your boat,
And the 20% that you said that have had serious damage, were they also participating in a lot of interaction, and they're the ones that are throwing the firecrackers or the gasoline on them? Are they the ones screaming more and giving that reaction?
I wish I knew. I mean, the researchers are dependent on self-reporting. Right. They're going to witness a handful of these interactions, but for the most part, they're relying on the people coming back to port and reporting that it happened,
what happened,
and showing some video or perhaps something like that. And so we don't really know whether the folks who experience an aborted interaction and no damage are calmer in their reaction than those who experience damage. We don't have the data because we're reliant on the mariners to report this, to self-report this. And, their accounts are going to be mixed in quality. They were panicking, or not panicking, and so we don't know whether they were panicking or not panicking. They might say they weren't panicking. In fact, they were panicking, so we're relying entirely on their version of events.
So we basically need to teach them like what you do when a grizzly bear comes.
Something like that.
Hold in, like be really quiet, act dead. You know what I mean?
That's a perfect analogy. And how many people actually do what they were told to do by the forest rangers when they encounter the grizzly bear?
True.
They scream and run, which is exactly what you're not supposed
to do.
And so, I mean, the fact is that we don't think most people are doing what they've been asked to do by the authorities. And they are still doing those things that they've been asked not to do.
And they're not going to tell the insurance company that they were misbehaving, are they?
Right.
Yeah. And they're not going to tell the authorities they shot at them with a flare because that's illegal. They're critically endangered, and it's against the law to shoot at them with flares. So they're not going to report that. The reason we know they've done it is because they were seen doing it by somebody else on another boat. So, it's very frustrating, I think, for the authorities. I've met some of them and they're very frustrated.
I would.
And I've heard some of the accounts, some of the mariners' accounts of these interactions, and they're terrified. They were literally terrified while it was happening. And you can't expect necessarily rational behavior from folks who are terrified. But and like I said, that it's not fading away, at least not yet. We're in 2026 now. We're waiting for the latest reports. But last year it was just as bad. It was just in a different area.
Jeez, that's really disappointing. It's like you're the auntie over here in the United States waiting to hear if your nephew went to jail again. You know what I mean?
Exactly. No,
Did he get arrested again?
Right. I keep hoping this is the year where we get no reports.
Right, exactly. Was he
and
well
last
behaved?
year,
please?
I was thinking, maybe this is the year. And then I don't remember the first interaction was at the end of March or early April. And then, like I said, they actually sank a boat again last year, fairly early on in April. It just, every year Auntie cries.
Right, exactly.
Junior's back in jail,
right.
Just waiting now to see if they've grown up or they're still being teenagers.
Yeah, pray that they will.
And since it started, so again, this is 6-7 years since it started, 2020, there have been several animals that have disappeared from the population or have stranded. I think there have been 4 carcasses seen. The problem is when they strand in this area, they tend to strand in areas that are inaccessible. And so by the time they are even seen, the carcasses are usually fairly decomposed. So they don't get great data from the strandings that do occur. So if there's evidence of, somebody shot them or they were killed as opposed to just dying naturally or whatever, we don't tend to get those data reported to us as the expert group, because the stranding networks or whatever who are part of that group don't have those data themselves. They got to the carcass and it was already several weeks gone or whatever, or they never got to the carcass at all. It was reported, and by the time they were able to get out to this remote area, it's gone. So We don't really know. I mean, I think there have been about 4 or 5 animals who disappeared from the population since
Oh my
this started.
goodness, that's so
And that
terrible.
could be nothing. Like it could just be, animals do die. Or it could be something. And we just don't know.
So for the listeners that are hearing this and that feel very strongly and connected to orcas and they want to support what you're doing and help you and the authorities make this a more, I don't know, more cautious and
what you can do as an average citizen who just really loves orcas and knows that, this isn't a malicious behavior. And, this whole meme, this whole narrative that it's revenge and it's aggressive and, it can be funny, the billionaires versus the orcas and all of that. I've seen some of the memes and even I laugh, but it's not funny for them because they are being dealt
they're getting
with.
themselves in trouble. Yeah.
They're getting themselves in trouble. This is a high risk game they're playing. And so you can, one, try to resist that narrative. Don't perpetuate the myth that this is a revenge scenario. Again, it might feel satisfying from a human point of view, but from the whale's point of view, it's a dangerous narrative because it angers the mariners, and if they believe it, then they do see it as aggression and they do see it malicious and they do want to even more than before protect themselves. And so they're going to do things to protect themselves. And so you're encouraging that behavior, even though, of course, that's not your intent. So try to stay away from that narrative. Try to tell your neighbors, your friends, whoever might be sailing through that area. If you're in the UK in particular, there's a lot of mariners who go through that area. Tell them it's just a game. These are, not attacks. Don't respond as if it is an attack. Be I don't want to say respectful because they're not being respectful to you. It is teenagers and they are being a bit hooliganish.
And you just want to ignore them.
But
be quiet and ignore them.
Exactly. Do you
don't feed into it?
Do you encourage teenagers to be stupid?
Exactly.
No, you don't. You
don't
try
feed the trolls.
Don't feed the trolls. Yeah. And so if you understand that that's what's going on, maybe you can sort of grit your teeth and bear it and do nothing, play dead. And then when they go away, you've actually helped make the game boring. And that's the goal, is to make the game boring.
But is there a way for them to support organizations
that
are working with this?
I would urge everybody to go to the Grupo de Trabajo de los Orcas Atlánticas, which is GTOA. So Google GTOA, Grupo de Trabajo, which means working group. So it's the Atlantic Orca Working Group.
Of Orcas. Yeah.
And so GTOA is Spanish for the Working Group for Orcas, Atlantic Orcas. So go to that website, GTOA, just Google it and it'll come up. And you will see a lot of information. It's available in English about what the researchers there are doing. And, contact them and see what would be best if you want to give money. It's for research. And that, of course, is extremely important here. So if you do want to donate money, GTOA is who best to donate it to. They're a research group that is really trying to do God's work, as it were.
Right? I would say so too.
They're trying to save these juvenile and adolescent orcas from themselves. They're not helping themselves. And their mothers are watching out for them, but they can't get them to stop. And so, GTOA is where you would want your money to go, and you're supporting research if you donate there. So again, what I'm hoping happens in this coming season, again, we were hoping it would happen last 2025 season, but it didn't, is more research on these actual methods of deterring the orcas. And again, I have a lot of hope for the hukilau because it's cheap, it's easy to make, everybody could carry one. And if it works, it works. But there are a few other options that we came up with when we had this workshop in 2024. We actually a bunch of experts met in Madrid, and we discussed this situation. This was, obviously 2 years ago, and we were hoping all these things would be tested in 2025, and it didn't happen. So that's the way things go. Funding and opportunity. Again, opportunity is not necessarily available. And one of the frustrating things is the most active research group is in the Strait of Gibraltar, and the whales weren't doing it there much. last year. They went north. So that's what I mean about opportunity. You need to obviously see an interaction happen to, or have an interaction happen to you as a research vessel or as a privately owned vessel that's working with the researchers to test these methods, right? You can't just test them if the whales aren't approaching you. So opportunity isn't as easy as you'd think. They're not interacting with the same vessel over and over and over and over again. They're just interacting randomly with vessels that are out there that attract them. And there's a particular kind of vessel they like. They like these sailing vessels that are 60 feet long or so and have this spade rudder, shaped like a spade. So we know the type they like, but they're interacting, they're approaching different individual vessels every time. So opportunity is difficult to come by, even though when you're the one being interacted with, it seems real easy. These whales are approaching you. So getting the reliability of encounters to test these methods has been difficult. That's what I'm trying to say. So funding is difficult, opportunity is difficult. You would think in such a well-traveled area it wouldn't be so hard, but as I said, it's such a random occurrence. Again, it doesn't happen as often as you think it does. If it did, there'd be a lot more damage and a lot more sinkings. It's a game. It's not like their whole life is focused on. Their whole life is focused on eating, and making babies and all these things that, wild animals are focused on. This is a game that they do once in a while. And so the reliability of predicting where it's going to occur and when it's going to occur is pretty low. So it isn't as easy as you would think it would be to test these methods. But again, the authorities are trying to get their act together and pursue these research projects. And there are researchers who are interested in helping. And there's one group that's very active in the Strait of Gibraltar. And if the animals are actually going to move back there when they interact, then maybe they'll have more opportunities to test. There's another method that they've been testing. And it has, in fact, again, maybe one of the reasons that they moved from Gibraltar was because it was effective, was they've had a couple of vessels fitted with these studs on their rudders. They're like sort of goth dog collars, punk studs, and yeah, you might call them spikes. I think that is a bit misleading because it sounds like you're trying to injure them, and they're not that bad, but they're definitely, you can feel them. And the point is to make the rudder itself an unattractive object. They're ramming them, right? They're ramming them with their heads, basically. It's how they kill things. It's of course, a foraging or hunting method. They ram sharks. They ram bluefin tuna. These are bluefin tuna specialists. Orcas also attack other whales and dolphins, and they ram them. So this is an actual natural behavior, sort of like us punching somebody in the face with a fist. And if you make the object that they're focused on, which is the rudder, this spiky, stud-filled, rough surface that actually you go ouch when you hit it, maybe that would deter them. And so they have actually outfitted a few boats, I think 2. I'm not really sure how many vessels were actually outfitted with this stud array. And in fact, like I said, they moved north. So it may have been effective. And again, we're waiting for some data to be reported about that. We had some ideas about how to deter them without injuring them. It would hurt. It would definitely be a negative. But if it could, if everybody put them on their vessels, and some mariners aren't going to want to put those on their vessels, right? Because they might have a hydrodynamic effect on the rudder, and they wouldn't want to, mess up the speed, for example. Of the
racing yachts.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, not everybody's going to be into putting studs on their rudders. But if enough vessels agree to put those on their boats, then the whales wouldn't know which boats do or don't have them, or maybe they would. They could echolocate off the rudder and say, "Oh, this is a spiky one." If they learn that that's not a fun thing, then they would start picking on the ones without them, and then the ones without them would go, "I better get them," And so, but again, I really like the idea of the hukilau because you don't change anything permanently. It's deployed and pulled back up and deployed and pulled back up. And cheap, you can make your own, quite frankly. And, maybe somebody could start building, develop one that's really, really easy to make, cheap to buy. And so you could just get one in a store, but time will tell.
So make your rudder like a goth rudder or a hippie beaded curtain rudder.
I mean, it sounds funny and everybody's like, oh, God, I wish they would stop, and I totally agree. But let's put it this way. We may have to change our own behavior before this ends. And that may seem unfair, or I don't know how some folks might react to that. But we are in their living room.
Mhm.
We are in their world when we're sailing through it. This is
Agreed.
their home.
Agreed.
We don't necessarily live there, right? We're just passing through on a medium, the ocean, that isn't our natural home. Whereas, of course, it's where they evolved. It's where they live. And so if we have to alter our own behavior to get them to change theirs, I would argue that that is something we should make the effort to do in order to both protect them and us. Because again, it's no fun to be rammed by a pack of orcas, by a pod of predators. You don't want that to happen to you. And since the negative efforts to deter them, these harmful efforts to deter them, have been ineffective. I cannot repeat that often enough. It has not worked to shoot flares at them, to throw firecrackers overboard, to dump gasoline on them. It has not stopped them.
So stop. Exactly.
Yeah, let's
So
just stop it.
Stop
It is harmful to them.
Agreed.
And it's not working.
Agreed. Well, Dr. Kraken, we are so lucky to have the expert, Dr. Naomi Rose, always on our show.
I am not the expert.
No, but you are an expert. You're an orca biologist.
I'm an orca biologist, but I have never even seen an Iberian orca.
I know, but I'm talking about the expert of orcas.
The folks who study these particular orcas are, Spanish and Portuguese and
That's
French,
true.
and they were part of this group that had the workshop in Madrid, and they are doing their very best. And I am just somebody who's part of the group that's trying to come up with ideas.
An incredible person that's part of the group, and we're very, very lucky to have you on the show.
Thanks, you
right?
guys.
Absolutely.
Yes. And for everyone that's listening, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and follow us on social media, like us, and subscribe. And thank you so much for being part of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour.
Thank you.
Hey, Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow us for future episodes. And also, refer us. We'd love it. We would also like to hear from you, so please contact us on social media, or you can email us about a topic that you're interested in hearing about. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, or you would like us to come visit your science facility and do a live episode, email us at info@absolutelysmashingllc.com. This podcast was edited and produced by Absolutely Smashing. The music is produced by Jolly Shore Leave. Thank you again for listening, and we couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for being part of the Marine Conservation Happy Hour crew.